The Dog Days Are Over is probably one of the most revealing episodes about present-day Diane. We're positioned with a lost Diane, grieving over her marriage falling apart with Mr. Peanutbutter, and, desperate to find emotional stability, uses a girl cruise trip to Vietnam to give herself some much-needed catharsis and self-discovery, stating 10 reasons to go to Vietnam. But this is Bojack Horseman, so of course this is not going to happen smoothly. Diane is someone with impossible standards for herself and the world around her, and The Dog Days Are Over has Diane finally discover the difference between reality and the world she has imagined for herself, and sets her on the very literal journey that she takes all the way through to Good Damage. By the way, if you haven't already, I would recommend watching the Good Damage video I did, as I would consider this a bit of a sequel to that video. Also subscribe. This is Lite Writes, and here are 10 things The Dog Days Are Over says about Diane Nguyen. Number 1. The divorce isn't a celebratory fuck you. We've seen throughout the years in film and television this representation of a cathartic divorce, having women go on extravagant adventures to fully take advantage of their newfound independence, while the man wallows in a pit of hopelessness after losing their spouse. But we begin this episode with Diane bawling her eyes out, mascara running down her face, and running as far as she can from LA. Divorce is to many people the failure of a relationship you thought would last forever. For me, Diane's divorce was inevitable because in a narrative sense, some of the problems people had with Diane over the span of the series is that she felt too stagnant a character, the whiny, pessimistic feminist of the cast that gave little leeway for fun and laughter. Given that her personality is like a foil to Mr. Peanutbutter, it was only really a matter of time before Mr. Peanutbutter's constant Hollywood ostentatiousness and hyper-extroversion and superficiality grew too much to bear for Diane's more reserved lifestyle.
You hear that? She said yes! Let's kick it! Erica, did you hear she said yes?
What's worse is that Diane's new home is a dump. It's old and gross and sticky, and a reminder that she came from a loveless family who gave her nothing, only to happen to marry the right person financially. This marriage was making Diane stagnate. It didn't provide anything she sees as worthwhile for herself, and if anything, had her see that the world of the financial elite are just as repugnant and corrupt as the background she herself loathed growing up in.
24 hours from now, the news cycle will move on to something else.
Diane thrives best when presented with tangible challenges she can actually change for herself, and it's from here that we see the most important character arc she has all the way through to Good Damage. Number 2. This is very likely the beginning of Good Damage's story. She's generally been pressured to a deadline to write something with a surface level importance for the audience by everyone she has previously worked for. All of her work is just face-saving biographies or shallow pop feminist rants with girl crush. Diane has long grown weary with the Hollywood trend where you make media that gives the most happy juice the fastest, while the people behind it are desperate to convince themselves that their work is actually much more profound than it really is. In any case, she's never really had the time to work for herself on her own terms before, or really write anything that she feels personally invested in without it being ultimately harmful to her own image or for her relationships. Take the fracking article or the gun article, which both spawned from intense, seething hatred for two particular men's actions.
But you told me this morning you weren't going to frack, and now I can't turn on a faucet in my own home without getting third-degree burn.
There was never a clear and well-managed process behind these two articles. The world of Hollywood puts forward the idea that the big important works are only important because they reaffirm Western values or that we're just told that they're important. They might not even mean anything when you or me or Diane consume it. This episode is key to highlighting her worst habit of making a mountain out of a molehill when it comes to facing her own problems with her image and what it is that she wants to create. Number 3. The fetishization of her culture. When you are an American ex-person, or Vietnamese American in this case, the family usually immigrated from the non-American country 1 or 2 generations up from you. There is such interesting cultural history within close proximity to Diane, yet the acclimatization to the American lifestyle that Diane's family goes through erodes the past Diane has with her Vietnamese roots. What's even more jarring is that her father is literally a professor in Vietnamese studies, yes, really? Yet refuses to even humour the idea to talk to Diane about his studies because he wants to separate his job from his life.
Christ, Dee, that's my job. I wouldn't ask you to have a period on your day off.
He doesn't live as a Vietnamese person, he lives as an American. I'm not in the position to really make any statements about the kind of relationship you should have with your genealogical past. I've seen my family tree, and trust me, it's pretty uneventful. But as I mentioned earlier in number 2, Diane wants to use her lineage to create something meaningful about her, to find the thing that makes sense for her. But when she begins to adorn the traditional garments of her ancestors, she's dissatisfied.
You put on the clothing you bought and it feels like a costume. This is not your home. You're a tourist here.
A culture is not for you to temporarily visit in order for you to find enlightenment. That's not the responsibility of Vietnam to do that. We know Diane's doing this because she got a divorce. Diane at present never really mentioned Vietnam in any serious capacity until now. It was just a convenience for her to latch onto something before she falls back into the hole she felt that we see at the beginning of the episode. Number 4. Romanticizing your culture isn't what it's made up to be. Is this similar to the last point? Maybe. Do I still have a point? Also maybe. So, Diane prefaces many of her ideals and ambitions predicated on herself as a minority trying to find her voice in a world full of gross rich white men. Or horses, I guess. Diane, when in Vietnam, seems to only really interact with people she can actually speak with, despite trying to connect with her ancestral culture.
Làm ơn giúp tôi. Thấy con trai tôi
I'm
đâu?
sorry, I don't
Con
speak...
trai tôi, thằng nhỏ,
I don't-
kêu cháu, okay? Nhìn chung quanh.
I don't understand you.
Giúp tôi.
The area she visits is filled with people that look like her and places with her name over every sign, yet she still feels nothing more than a tourist. She expects to immediately be immersed seamlessly in her ancestors' past, but for the majority of the episode she spends her time walking around the nondescript Vietnamese markets alone. There's the desire to have the tourist experience, as shown by the iconic imagery that is actually just a fake billboard of the location she thought she had in mind. God, it's like this episode is screaming to Diane that she romanticizes her experiences with the world around her, perhaps more than any other character. She's gone through so much. Where is her happy ending on the boat in Hanoi? Just another myth she was sold by Hollywood. Number 5. Finding yourself is a myth. People have long sold the idea of finding yourself as you go traveling the world. It definitely can help open your mind to the world around you, its cultures and its many facets, but it won't necessarily help to find who you are. Diane has long been sold these myths by the people she's looked up to and wants to make something that could inspire other people in the same way that they inspired her, to have that presence that meant something to her in her childhood. But sadly, the characters and the world we are inspired by, in the blockbuster sense, are now designed to be addictive and have this astrology-like quality where the messages are just vague enough to resonate with the large majority of people. The setup of this episode is clever in the way that she has the authorial voice of this carefree girl boss that travels around the world and has fun, but the inner Diane voice is hating every moment and seeing every disappointment. It's this contrast that provides an insight into the world of the creator, meaning Diane, the author, and how everything has to be worded in such a way to deceive audiences into buying an experience that they were convinced of by a person who doesn't even believe in the things she writes. Number 6. Life doesn't just suddenly stop existing once you leave to have a holiday. Unfortunately, everyone still functions when Diane is busy pursuing stuff on her own, and she wants to ignore this. Mr. Peanutbutter is still calling her, Bojack is still confused about her recent actions, and everyone else has things going on with them that cause a small rift. Diane has never been the type to crave companionship in the same way that Mr. Peanutbutter does, but I have never seen Diane look and feel so alone until this episode. Most of the interactions she has with others are fleeting, and the eagle character we see Diane get intimate with is just as much a fantasy for her as it is for him.
Wow. I know this is crazy, but even though you can't understand a word I'm saying, I feel like we have a real connection.
And the only reason she pursues him is because there is that familiarity that she can manipulate, which, is bad, don't do that. She only ever really opens up to Bojack in this episode, and that's after she has accepted that she has failed to go out and find the mysterious sense of purpose she decided to promise herself on her search in Vietnam. It's easy to think that getaways like this will cleanse and detox your mind space, but that's honestly a lie sold to you by most hotel and travel companies. Number 7. Mr. Peanutbutter is still eager to keep Diane in his life. Because of his relentless optimism and, honestly, neediness, it is essential for him to remain in the right frame of mind and ignore the blatant emotional turmoil Diane is undergoing. And it is this mindset that holds Diane back from earnestly expressing herself, because she is so used to Mr. Peanutbutter trying to find an immediate catch-all solution to her problems. Mr. Peanutbutter's eyes kinda say it, with the eyebrows upturned, and how he flip-flops between sincere to farce.
I have to tell you, I'm glad I'm not still paying your phone bill because this call must be costing a fortune.
He knows he's imposing on Diane, but he chooses to ignore the feeling in the moment and continues to perpetuate this bad habit further. Mr. Peanutbutter seems to enjoy the naivete of younger women not really experiencing a bad relationship yet, as seen with Pickles. There's no emotional baggage tied with Pickles to drag down Mr. Peanutbutter's terminally optimistic lifestyle, and the millennial influencer lifestyle Pickles holds is pretty in line with the facade Mr. Peanutbutter likes to put up, where he is then hyper-friendly with Diane in spite of him clearly having feelings for her still. This is explored later in the series, where he cheats on Pickles with Diane shortly before proposing to Pickles. Number 8. The content is more for Diane herself than for her audience. It gets fairly obvious to spot this farther down the list, but Diane's relationship with her audience or with other people, unlike everyone else, is almost never mentioned. So she writes these points about Vietnam almost like little post-it notes to remind her to have fun. And what's worse is that not a lot of people really think to ask about Diane, save for Bojack occasionally, which is highlighted in this episode in the party scene with everyone getting distracted with other guests or, I guess, phone calls from work.
Or my work, which is keeping me very busy. Excuse me, I have to take this. Hi, Flip? Yeah, are we sure we need this strip club set?
Bojack's ripple effects with everyone he meets is heavily explored. Todd meets a colourful selection of partners he vibes with. Mr. Peanutbutter is always that rung higher than everyone else socially, and Princess Carolyn is consistently bogged down with work and her clients. Diane has always been the one that's just sort of there compared to everyone else, and whenever we get an examination into her and Bojack's relationship, it always has this sordid texture that we feel whenever we're positioned with Bojack from the sour end to season 1. Number 9. Bojack and Diane will never be together. This scene around halfway through the episode between Bojack and Diane is incredibly uncomfortable. Somehow this show manages to capture the exact moment that the two of them realize that they cannot and will not be together, and it's in this very scene. They're both drunk, and the two of them inch towards each other, prodding the idea that they could make out, and it wouldn't mean the same thing it did in season 1.
What?
No, I'm not saying we should. No, I'm just saying we could, and that's weird.
Diane now isn't some prize for Bojack anymore like she was in season 1. She is his friend, and doing anything like that with her now would totally ruin that friendship. It ends up becoming more of an emotional punch that her life is going to be very different from here on out. And additionally, we as the audience are aware of the dramatic irony that Bojack is really hiding a lot of things from Diane at the moment that would perhaps throw her into a worse spiral if anything was revealed. So I'm sort of glad he decided to delay telling her in the midst of being absolutely wasted. Good for him. Number 10. Diane won't have the validation she was promised. This whole episode is about how some audiences in the BuzzFeedosphere kind of go through this oxymoronic, toxic, therapeutic phase of reshifting their life in order to avoid the central conflict with themselves, which for Diane is probably her biggest flaw. She lists all these reasons to visit in order to provide superficial ways to reinvigorate herself with a sense of purpose, but the answer to getting over your struggle is always the thing you want to conveniently ignore. She watched Horsing Around and internalized the happy ending at the end of the 25-minute episode. She consumed media that promised self-actualization and the idea of emotional stability, when in reality she refuses to confront this even when in the middle of therapy. Diane, rather than speaking about her trauma, pokes into the therapist's other clients and talks about them instead. And this deflection to other people is something that Diane has always done, as it's literally her job to deconstruct and talk about other people as a writer and biographer. Diane wants to seem to go through the motions of internal growth without actually feeling those motions, which haunts her all the way through the series, until it comes to a head in Good Damage. The trip to Vietnam seems to be a failure for Diane. She's not much happier, she didn't manage to connect with her culture, and didn't do much in the way of being a tourist either. It's then that she has a phone call with Bojack where she admits to him that he was right all along. That she's been strange, and awkwardly trying to force new aspects of her personality that aren't actually her.
You hate parties.
I don't hate parties. You hate parties. I'm fun.
Okay, you know what? Forget this.
I'm sorry, Bojack.
Hey, your haircut looks great. Mr. Peanutbutter's gonna love it.
The show consistently frames Diane as the moral compass of the series for Bojack to follow, especially in the first season. But this episode reverses this and brings Diane back to reality. Her husband is an ex. She is in a dilapidated apartment, she still hates parties, and she feels like crap. So she sighs and finally comes to terms with Mr. Peanutbutter having a new romantic interest.
I'm really happy for you, Mr. Peanutbutter.
The whole reason she even decided to go to Vietnam was to run away from the choices she made to divorce him, but it's now that she decides to face the new world of the single life. It's this rock bottom moment for Diane that has her look upwards to try and find who the me really is in Diane.
But you survive. You learn that you can survive being alone.